Hello, I'm Dr. Lissa Rankin, and I'm the co-author of RelationSick, which will be out May 2026 with my co-author, Harvard psychiatrist Dr. Jeffrey Rediger. And I wanted to talk to you today about a kind way to initiate a boundary conversation. And I'm going to apologize in advance because I'm going to read something that I've written about this, and my eyes look super weird when I'm trying to read off of the screen, so forgive me. My self-conscious parts needed to say that. So recently I was in Love School, which is the Internal Family Systems community of practice that I co-teach with several other guest teachers, working on relational skills, skill building, and relational recovery work for people, especially who have wounded boundaries, trauma survivors, people who are in narcissistic relationships, or they're codependently enabling narcissistic individuals, or they're the more narcissistic one and they're trying to learn to do better, or they have disorganized attachment or other kinds of insecure attachment wounding, avoidant or anxious, and they're trying to heal their attachment wounding. So I was working with one of my classes in Love School, and we were talking about the importance of changing the behavioral patterns of letting abusive people off the hook. Because many people who are indoctrinated into spiritual belief systems, they have this forgive and forget, or I'm so unconditionally loving that my love doesn't need to hold someone to account for abuse, or I'm so compassionate for why the person did the thing that they did because they're a trauma survivor that I can sort of overlook what they're doing. And this can set people up to chronically tolerate being mistreated without kind of firmly setting boundaries, without enacting consequences, without holding somebody to account. And this can lead to chronic nervous system dysregulation that can impact our physical health. And as a medical doctor, that's part of what I really care about, is the physical health impacts of unbalanced or narcissistic or abusive relationships on the physical body. So one of the things that my co-writing partner, Dr. Rediger, found when he was working for 17 years researching health outliers, people who had incurable illnesses who were cured either without conventional medical treatment or with medical treatment deemed inadequate for cure, is that when faced with the possibility of death, many of these folks went from pushover doormats to like feisty dudes and dudettes who put their needs first for a change in order to try to save their own lives. And when you're fighting for your life, that sometimes means disappointing or rocking the boat or upsetting other people who might have unreasonable expectations of you or feel entitled to take advantage of you or to use you as narcissistic prey or supply, or to control or dominate you into submission to their entitled demands. As my colleague who wrote the foreword to Sacred Medicine, my book Sacred Medicine, Gabor Mate, unpacks in his book, When the Body Says No, when we fail to protect ourselves from people who expect too much of us with clear, firm, and if need be, fiercely confrontational boundaries, with a clear no, like, no, that's over my line, then sometimes the body says no for us. I know I had to learn this the hard way when I was dealing with health issues back in my 30s. And then when I've done 4 TEDx talks, and I wrote the book Mind Over Medicine, and there was a PBS special done about it called Heal Yourself, Mind Over Medicine. And this kind of skyrocketed me into the limelight. I was then just inundated with people, really good-hearted people, most of them. Some of them were exploitative con artists, but mostly good-hearted people who wanted something from me. And I joked in therapy that my job, doing what I do now, has forced me to become like a professional disappointer. Like, I have to let people down every day because people want more from me than I'm capable of giving without over-giving, and then becoming resentful and overriding my self-care and not being available to the people that I love in my life, and not being able to earn money or not being able to prioritize my own career or my own hobbies or my own life. And it's super hard for me. Like, because of my own trauma with my mom, one of the most intolerable feelings for me is the feeling of letting other people down, the feeling that people are disappointed in me. But I have had to learn, because of my own boundary wounding, I've had to learn how to disappoint people. Many of them, lovely strangers with real needs. So if you do not want to master boundary settings, by all means, don't get a job like this. You have to get good at it. But the good news is that there is like a kind way to start to learn how to set boundaries and how to let people down. And I want to talk a little bit about that. So first, you have to get clear on your needs and desires. Like, begin with your imagination. Imagine the best possible scenario for this relationship that you want to mend, and just get as crystal clear as you can on what you need to ask for in order to improve the safety, the quality, and the health of your relationship. Until you can get clarity on what you want and need, it's really hard to set the other person up for success. And if you're just feeling like critical and resentful and passive aggressive, but you're not being clear about, what would help this person get it right, then it's kind of unfair to just have this punishing energy. So getting clear on what you want and need, which includes being able to do that, to pause and do the U-turn. And in internal family systems, we call it the YO U-turn, to look inside and be like, what do I want? What do my parts want and need? What is it that's not going right for me? Where are my boundaries getting crossed? And then to be able to communicate clearly about that. Part of doing that is cleaning up dual relationships and gray zones. So just pay attention to where you might be participating in muddy boundaries by crossing lines into dual relationships. And by dual relationship, what I mean is like you're doing business with your romantic partner, or you're hiring your family member, or you're dating your client. These are dual relationships. They're fraught when it comes to boundaries. It doesn't mean it's not possible to have dual relationships. It just means you have to be a boundary master in order to have a healthy dual relationship. So just notice where those dual relationships might be and pay attention to gray zones. Gray zones meaning like, why are you in this relationship? Sure, you care about this person or this job, or you wouldn't risk having a boundary conversation, but why else are you in this relationship? Were you just born into this relationship? It's a family member. Is your boss or your partner paying your bills? Do you have an agenda for the relationship? What are you getting out of it? Is there any transaction that's not being named? Are you exploiting somebody else but not really wanting to admit it, or are they exploiting you? Are you going to family dinners because you're hoping to get a generous chunk of cash in the inheritance? Like, what is your motive? What are your agendas? And really being on to yourself so that you can clean up those gray zones and start to get more honest with yourself, and then more honest with other people. And then be upfront about your boundary wounding and your desire to get healthy in recovery. It's okay if you're preparing to have a boundary conversation with somebody. It's okay to let them know, like, I have a history of having my boundaries breached and I'm not good at it. I'm going to be messy with this. I'm in relational recovery. I'm working on having cleaner boundaries. I'm in therapy, but I don't really know how to do it. So, forgive me if this is sort of messy. And healthy, safe enough people will support you if they know that you're healing and you're in recovery. Evoking empathy and being vulnerable can help the conversation flow smoothly and help sort of settle the nervous systems of you both. Because if you approach somebody for a boundary conversation, it often can create anxiety in the other person, because it makes them maybe worry that you're not happy with the relationship, or afraid that you're going to leave the relationship, or maybe they get defensive and maybe they go on the attack. People who are very narcissistic or even sociopathic will tend to have very little empathy or ability to care about your needs. And so just notice that. If you initiate a boundary conversation and somebody is instantly making it all about themselves, that's information. That's a red flag. But people who are worth keeping close to you will absolutely care if you've been overgiving, if you've been growing silently resentful, if you've been fantasizing about ending the relationship, if you've been sort of catastrophizing. Like, being clear is so much kinder than acting out all kinds of sideways and passive aggressively punishing somebody because you're not being direct with a boundary conversation. And then if you're new to boundary conversations, try writing it down. Prepare a script. Write it down, and you can read it to that person in person, or you can read it to them on a WhatsApp voice message. You can practice with somebody who's not the person you're having the conversation with, just so that you can notice what comes up in you when you try to make the boundary or try to express what you want and need. Being able to have a little bit of practice session can be super helpful. And especially if you're a writer like me, writing it down can help you get it right. And then you can sort of edit it. You can put yourself in the other person's shoes and put on an empathy lens and imagine how it's going to land on them and try to get it right. If you're new at boundaries, just extemporaneously trying to have a boundary conversation, it can come out all kinds of sideways. I know one of the things that I've frequently seen people who are new to boundary setting is they will set a boundary and then they'll notice any reaction in the other person that they judge as negative. If there's any resistance, and usually there will be, if you're having a boundary conversation, that usually means you're maybe taking away a privilege, or you're trying to call somebody out on something that they're doing that you don't like. But if you notice that there's any resistance on the part of the other person, people will often set a boundary and then take it away in the same conversation. I heard my partner once, he was trying to set a boundary with a person around work, and he wanted someone as a friend, but he didn't want a dual relationship. He didn't want to work with that person. He felt like maybe he was getting exploited. This person was trying to take advantage of his Harvard connections, and a lot of people want to take advantage of my partner because he's from Harvard. And so he was trying to sort of separate that out to find out if this person really was a friend, or if they were only befriending him because of Harvard. And so he started by saying, I want to have a personal relationship with you. I really like you. I think you're really cool. I want to have a little bromance with you. And let's keep it just friends. And then I don't actually want to do business with you. I don't want you involved in Harvard. I don't want us doing any financial transactions about business. And, I'd like to separate that out. And then he added, because he saw the look on the other person's face, and it might be fine if we do business really soon, like next week or a month later, but not today. So he called it softening. So sometimes when people are new to setting a boundary, they will set the boundary and then take away the boundary in the same conversation. And it's super confusing for the other people. So that's why it's really important to comfort your own scared parts. If you notice that somebody else is having some resistance to your boundary and you feel scared you're going to lose them, you feel scared they're going to attack you, you feel scared they're going to blame you, just come back to do the U-turn, come back inside, hold your parts, hold the scared parts, hold the parts that maybe were very poorly treated if you tried to stand up for your boundaries when you were little, and be in self with those parts, re-cementing, re-securing that self to parts relationship, reparenting those scared parts. And then if you can deliver your script to, an objective person without dysregulation, and you think you don't need a therapist present for your boundary conversation, then you can request a good time to talk. Now, you might not be able to do that without having a third party present. Maybe you're so scared, your parts are so scared that you're going to need a mediator, and that's totally fine. But if you think you can handle it, then it's important to find a good time to talk, right? You don't want to just accost somebody with a boundary conversation when it's 11 o'clock at night and you've both been drinking. You don't want to have a boundary conversation when you have to go in 5 minutes because you're in the middle of work, or having a good time and asking for someone else's consent about whether this is a good time to have this kind of conversation is just really respectful, and it's going to set you up to have a good conversation. And then if you've succeeded in getting someone to commit to a hard talk, begin with appreciation. Lead off with why you value this relationship. Tell somebody it's not like just to prop up their ego. It's actually really important because some people, when they are having a boundary conversation, they feel insecure. They feel insecure in the attachment in the midst of that. So we can help to foster secure attachment when we lead off with why we appreciate someone before we talk about what's difficult. And then read your script out loud. Don't email it. This is a setup for terror and anxiety in your own system if the other person doesn't respond right away. And if you do choose to email or text what you've written, which I really strongly advise against, then set it up so that at least you're on the phone or on Zoom or right there in person when the person is going to be reading it so that you can talk about it right away. Now, maybe they can't talk about it right away. Maybe they need some processing time, and you can read your script out loud, or you can be there on the phone when they're reading an email or whatever, and they have a right to say, can I get back to you on this? I'm needing to take this in. Totally cool. But otherwise, being able to be there to respond, to initiate the conversation. So if they're capable of doing it in real time, then give the other person a chance to respond. Their feelings are their feelings. They're allowed to have their feelings about your boundary request, and they may get angry. They may feel sad. They may be disappointed. They may, I don't know. They can have whatever feelings that they may feel scared. They may feel threatened. That's okay. Your parts inside are allowed to have their reactions to their reactions as well, and that's really normal. So, but what you don't want to do is let somebody else's reaction to your boundary request cause you to collapse and dissolve the boundary or soften the boundary too much or become unclear around the boundary. So next, you will allow the person to negotiate, right? Maybe they're a yes. Maybe they're a yes to the boundary. They say, cool, no problem. I'm going to respect that boundary. Great. Maybe they're like, no fucking way. I'm ending this relationship. I'm all the way out of here. Like, you can't control their reaction. But maybe they have a negotiation like, okay, I totally hear you. That makes sense. And this impacts me in this way. Would you be willing to listen to what my parts have to say about my reaction to that? And maybe you can find a middle ground where you can, I call that boundaries 2.0. Boundaries 1.0 is when you draw the line. It's not a negotiation. It's kind of an ultimatum. And you say, if you cross the line, here's what's going to happen. That's boundaries 1.0. But I prefer, if you have two IFS-informed people, boundaries 2.0 is when you can go back and forth in the negotiation when you're having a boundary conversation until both of you feel like you're both being heard and seen and respected. This isn't always possible with people who are very high on the narcissism spectrum. Often, really narcissistic individuals can't hear your no. They can't respect your no. They're not going to follow your no. And they have to be in control. They have to dominate. They have to override your no. They have to steal your consent. They're choice thieves, to use a word from Resmaa Menakem, who wrote a wonderful book called Monsters in Love. Anyway, once you get it all nailed down, write it down. Write down what the agreement is. Sign your agreement. Some people dissociate during difficult conversations, and amnesic parts can actually come in and wipe out their memory, which can be maddening if one of you is remembering the conversation and you feel gaslit because the other person is saying, we never agreed to that. You never set that boundary. I never agreed to that boundary. So writing it down is really helpful, especially if one or both of you have a tendency to dissociate. Again, having a third-party mediator can also be helpful, or you can even video your conversation so you have a document that can, evidence that it did happen. And then, of course, the difficult part is follow through, because you can make the best boundary agreement in the world, but if one or both of you is not going to follow it, and if there are not going to be any consequences if it's crossed, then it's not really, it sort of defeats the purpose. So setting the boundaries can seem like an insurmountable hurdle to those with severe boundary wounding, but enforcing and upholding the boundary is even harder for a lot of people. So think ahead and maybe anticipate what might happen if the other person doesn't cooperate with your boundary, and make a plan for that. So it's really kind if you can anticipate, like, what is going to happen if this person crosses the boundary? If it's a small thing, maybe you're just going to remind them again. My therapist told me that, healthy people may need to be reminded 1 or 2 times about a boundary. Unhealthy people will cross the boundary no matter how many times you set it. So, if it's a small thing, you might just remind them, and hopefully they'll, maybe they forgot, maybe they're in a habit, they're breaking a habit, and that's fine. But think about the consequences. What if it's a really important boundary? What's going to happen if they cross that boundary? Are you going to agree that it's like both of you get a traffic violation? Like, you're agreeing to this boundary, and if either of you crosses this boundary because you don't want to have 2 sets of rules, you don't want to have a double standard, then you have a monetary fine. Maybe you're going to dial down the intimacy dial, and you're going to create more distance. You're going to spend less time with somebody. Maybe you don't want to have them over to your house anymore. At the most extreme version, you would go no contact, right? Don't email me, don't text me, don't contact me. I'm ending this relationship, in essence. And if need be, sometimes lawyers and law enforcement and restraining orders, for example. But that's an extreme boundary. There's all kinds of ways to dial up and dial down the intimacy dial between those extremes of like all or nothing. You're all the way in my house, you're in my bed, you're in my kitchen, you're in my refrigerator with refrigerator rights, you're in my bank account sharing money, you're in my social network, and then there's no contact. And there's so many ways you can sort of start taking away privileges if somebody cannot respect your boundaries. And if this does go well, then celebrate. Like, honor the fact that you were able to have a difficult conversation, you were able to set a boundary, somebody else was able to show up for you and listen in a respectful way. And assuming the boundary gets kept, then celebrate. If it didn't go well, then you might have to grieve. You can feel frustrated, you can feel disappointed, you can feel sad, you can feel angry, all of that. But you might need to start dialing that person down a little bit, and that's sad. Our attachment systems, our parts that attach, they don't like having to create more distance when we care about somebody. So we don't want to skip that. Anyway, I'm writing a lot more about this in the book RelationSick, and we're teaching about boundaries, about relational life skills, about recovery work for people in narcissistic or codependent roles in relationships, in unbalanced relationships, in Love School. And you can find out about Love School on lissarankin.com. Please tell me what you think of this, and if this was helpful to you, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and share this with other people. So it's a pleasure being here to talk about a kind way to set boundaries.